Hi guys, today we are going to look at grammar, and I want to start with a little activity. I want you to look at these words and read them out loud in the plural form. And I want you to say these words out loud to yourself and listen to whether or not you are pronouncing the letter S in these words as a S or a Z. For example, weeks, bells. So pause the video and come back and we'll check the answers together. Now that you've had a chance to try it out for yourself, I want you to watch the following YouTube video so you can learn more about the S and Z rule we have in English. Go ahead and access this video either through the PowerPoint or through the video embedded beneath this lecture in Canvas. By now you've seen that we actually have 3 different ways to pronounce the plural S in English. I'm just going to use the examples S and Z, but hopefully what you gathered from the video is that we have these unique sounds in English. Let's look at the word cats and desks. So when you put your hand on your vocal cords and say those words, you'll notice there is no vibration. And this is because we're efficient human beings, and if a word contains the T sound represented by the letter T in cat, or the K sound represented by the letter K in desk, we're going to use the S sound for the letter S because why work harder? Why make your vocal cords work harder when it's not necessary? Alternatively, let's look at dogs and bibs. We're already vibrating at the end of the G and B sound at the end of those words, so we naturally use the Z sound as our plural S. Now you may have been surprised that this is how you make a word plural, because generally in grammar school when they ask how do you make the plural, you say add an S. But beyond writing, it's more complicated than that, because in spoken English there are 3 different sounds for the letter S. If you're a native English speaker, you've been using the correct S and Z your whole life. I've never had to teach my children which sound to use, they just know, and it was part of their competence as a native English speaker. Regarding our conversation on grammar, what we find is that there are rules of nature and rules of etiquette, and this plural S thing is a rule of nature. No one has ever had to teach this rule to a native speaker. A native English speaker. It's naturally acquired, it's not taught, and it is executed consistently. It would be really weird to find a native English speaker who would use the wrong sound for S, and speakers don't realize they are all executing it the same. So when linguists talk about grammar, we're not talking about the rules you've learned formally, such as I before E except after C, or a noun is a person, place, or thing. We're talking about things that you would have never been taught directly. We're focusing on the things that we do as native speakers, the rules we naturally acquire. When linguists talk about the grammar of a language, we're specifically talking about rules of nature. So this may be surprising, right? Because then what are we learning in school? Well, in school, we're learning the rules of etiquette, not the rules of nature. You're learning more about conventions of writing, like don't end a sentence with a preposition or avoid using phrasal verbs when you write. These are things you have been taught, and they represent the expectations of etiquette, the customs in those contexts. There are times when we need to modify our grammar because the rules of nature get in the way or don't apply to those contexts. Rules of etiquette are things you have to learn and remember to use. They don't come naturally to you. We have to think about it. We have to be consciously aware that we need to use it. This is very different than rules of nature that are automatic and you don't have to think about it. When linguists talk about rules of etiquette, we call this usage. We don't call it grammar. Usage means we're talking about prescriptive rules, rules that are prescribed in certain contexts of communication, and we'll talk more about prescriptivism in a few weeks. Today, however, we're going to look at the grammar, the rules of nature of Appalachian English. So to preface this conversation, you may or may not have been aware of Appalachian English And if you are aware of it, you've probably heard it called by different names such as hillbilly English. This dialect of English often has a less than positive connotation in our society, but what you're actually going to see is that this version of English is highly structured and has grammar rules that are as complex and developed as any other language in the world. But first I want to talk about dialects, a word we've used a lot this semester, but we've used it to talk about social groups and regions. And in this case, Appalachian English is a regional dialect. Dialect goes way beyond accent. People say, that's just my accent, but accent only means pronunciation or sounds, and an accent is part of the dialect umbrella, but it's just one part. Likewise, when we talk about dialect, it not only includes accent, but includes the lexicon, that mental dictionary of words that we know. So when we talk about dialect, it includes not only accent, not only the lexical choices a speaker makes, but also the grammar used by the speakers. So let's explore this by looking at the Appalachian English dialect. This dialect encompasses a large geographical region over many states. It is sometimes called mountain speech. By the way, not every speaker in this reddish pink area speaks Appalachian English, and not everyone that speaks Appalachian English speaks it all the time. But certainly we're going to see this dialect in this region here. Now, when I say a dialect encompasses accent, sound, words, and grammar, this table depicts what that means in relation to Appalachian English. In the next few slides, I'll cover a few key elements from this table, but if you want to look closer at the whole table, I've provided it for you as a PDF above this lecture in the Canvas course shell. We just said that dialect encompasses the lexicon. So as an example, these are lexical features that indicate how Appalachian English differs from standard American English. For example, in SAE, we say bag, and in Appalachian English, we say poke. Now you're probably seeing some words you've never heard before or used in this way before because they are not part of your dialect. However, you are also probably seeing some words that are familiar to you because you are either a speaker of or familiar with the Southern English dialect and the African American Vernacular English dialect. It is unclear why these three dialects share some of these lexical features, and also some of the features we'll cover in the next slides. But the most obvious deduction is that it relates to the geographical proximity of these dialects, meaning historically Southern English and AAVE heavily influenced each other given the initial regionalization of these two dialects. And as you saw from the Appalachian English map on slide 9, this dialect extends down into the south of the United States. In the next section of the table, we see some examples of the phonology of Appalachian speech. Remember, phonology means sounds of the language. So here we're discussing accent. For example, we see a raised vowel for words like for in Standard English and fur in Appalachian. Then there's the intrusive R like washer instead of washer. Or the final O changing to ER, like potato would be tater. If you've seen the Disney movie Cars, you're probably recognizing this as the dialect of Mater, right? The last part of the table we're discussing shows how the grammar is also different in this dialect than in Standard English. Again, when linguists talk about grammar, we're not talking about the rules you learned in school, the rules of etiquette. We're talking about the rules of nature, the rules no one has to teach you. First on this slide, we can look at the morphology grammar. And morphology has to do with how we form our words. More specifically, in Standard American English, we can say, I will drag him to the store. Or if I'm talking past tense, I can say, I drug him to the store. See how I morphed the word drag into drug? Well, in Appalachian English, their morphological rule is slightly different. And regarding the word drag, their past tense use is not drug, it's dragged. This slide also shows some examples of the syntax rules in this dialect, and syntax deals with the way we can combine our sentences together, what words we're allowed to use in some sentences, and what order those words have to be in for the sentence to make sense to the hearer. Syntax governs how something should be said. We'll come back to syntax, but I have another video for you to watch. Before you watch this next video, you need to know this. There's a lot of negative stereotypes against this dialect, and it is often regarded as broken and uneducated English. There is a heavy stigma on this variety. But I want you to pause this lecture and go back and watch this video so that you can see and hear the dialect for yourself. Go ahead and access this video either through the PowerPoint or through the video embedded beneath the lecture in Canvas. Let's come back to our conversation on grammar and syntax. Let's just dabble in it a little bit, okay? I don't want you to be scared. We're going to look at the verb to be. The past tense of the to be verb is like I was, you were. It takes on several versions, so we're not always aware we're using it, but we label all these variations under the umbrella term, the to be verb. Let's take a stab at this in SAE, which we're going to talk about more next week. For example, I was happy, you were happy, he, she, it was happy. Again, this is all past tense, something that has already happened. But let's look to see what's different between SAE and Appalachian English. And there's one distinct difference, which is you was instead of you were. You was happy instead of you were happy. So let's look closer. If you were making a language, you would think, okay, what makes the most sense in a language? And if you look at Appalachian English, it actually looks more efficient and consistent than SAE. In the singular form, all the versions use was. And in the plural form, all the versions use were. See, it totally looks more consistent than standard English. So now look back at standard American English and you start to think, wow, that's kind of odd that we always say you were. So in terms of consistency and elegance, Appalachian makes more sense. But regardless of elegance, both of these dialects have rules on when and how to use the to be verb. So when you think about it, which one of these seems more correct to you? You was going to the store last night, or you were going to the store last night? Most of us are going to say that the second one seems more correct to us, yet what we find is that linguistically, they are both absolutely correct in their own dialects. So it's not that Appalachian speakers are intentionally defying SAE rules and don't know any better, it's that they are perfectly executing their own dialect. All right, I got another video for you. This video from the LingSpace is going to reinforce what we're talking about, which is linguistic prejudices. Go ahead and access this video either through the PowerPoint or through the video embedded beneath this lecture in Canvas. In conclusion on today's lecture, here are some points from a linguistic perspective. First, what we deem as incorrect English is not always linguistically illogical. It's not a crazy mess of words. The use of you was instead of you were in Appalachian is completely logical, as you saw on slide 17. But we may mistakenly or ignorantly say it's not correct. Secondly, what is linguistically logical is not always what is deemed most correct. Again, we saw on slide 17 that using you was in Appalachian actually logically makes more sense than saying you were, as we do in standard American English. But still, we don't label Appalachian as correct English. In the video you just watched from the LingSpace, you learned that correctness is not determined by linguists. We're not dealing with a linguistic phenomenon, and linguists are not out there deducing what is correct and what is incorrect. Nope. It's a socio-political phenomena. When we elevate or devalue a language or dialect, it's not because one has a better grammar than the other. The way we value or devalue dialects has to do with socio-political things at play. So, our stance, your stance and my stance as linguists, and our final point for today is that language-wise, no dialect is inherently structured better or worse than any other dialect. That wraps up our lecture on grammar. Please let me know if you have any questions.